Yeah.
All right, welcome to episode 106 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm from my house here in Atlanta, Georgia. Thomas Dimitroff, though, is from his. Are we talking about van? Are we talking about car? Like, where are we at, Thomas? I know that you have, vehicles that are the marvel of society. So, like, tell me where you are.
No, I'm in actually a vehicle. Of course, I'm not in my van. It's been a crazy day. I've had to run my son over to different appointments and such. So I ended up being across town and I couldn't get back because the traffic was crazy. So pulled in a parking lot, and here I am making it happen.
Look at you. That's what I love about Sumer and everybody here. It's like, tomorrow I'm going to be, helping some students at Kennesaw State with that career fair. So, we're going to be on location there. And then obviously you're on location here. What we don't ever sleep, because football never sleeps. Thomas, when you think about yesterday, man, it was a day. I don't have this graphic for the screen, but like yesterday we had a couple games that we deemed not particularly watchable from our model, that were actually kind of crazy. Houston going on the road to Jacksonville as about 7-point underdogs. They win that game outright. And then a game that we're going to talk about a little bit later that was also deemed like not necessarily the most watchable was Dallas going on the road as 13-point favorites to 12. I think it was 12 ended up being with Diggs got hurt. 12-point favorites to the Arizona Cardinals. They lose that game outright. And honestly, like there were obviously fluky elements to both those games, but I'm pretty impressed with the play of the Houston Texans and the Arizona Cardinals, two teams I wrote about last week that were kind of the favorites to be the number one overall pick. They come out and perform really admirably. And there was a bunch of other great games this weekend that we're going to talk about. But I was particularly impressed and surprised by those two.
Look, let's start off talking about CJ Stroud. I mean, there's no getting around it. Everyone's really honed in on looking at these quarterbacks, who made what decision, right? How good is that decision? You and I both know it's really early after 2 games. You start getting into 3 games. I know it's only one more game, but in the next 2, 3, 4 games, you're going to have a lot of really strong evaluations on organizations, the ability to pick the right quarterback. I mean, that is a big, big deal. CJ Stroud and how he's been handling his world there in Houston, I think it's been wildly impressive. And I know you can pull out some stats on it, but the fact that he is living large in a lot of those really important quarterback categories, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think I've loved watching him standing in the pocket tall. He can still scramble and do his thing, of course, but he has an element about him that is quite attractive early on. Toss out some of those stats that I think are really, really impressive.
Yeah, I think for me right now, it's all about what he's doing in the pocket. He's been sacked 11 times so far. Depending upon where you look, he's been pressured over 50 times, right? So that like pressure to sack conversion is I'm thinking about this, right? And when you look at the various ways to measure quarterback play, we were talking about this, like the ability to overcome situations around you that aren't particularly great, is obviously a good one. I mean, when you look at a guy at 64.5% completion percentage, that's pretty solid early on, especially when, he's throwing to guys like Robert Woods and Tank Dell and John Mechie, who, congratulations to him for beating cancer and getting back on the football field, by the way. Like when I think about Stroud, I'm thinking about a guy who, a lot of people like Jacksonville yesterday in Survivor, because they thought Houston has so many players down. How the heck are they going to try to win? And obviously the big question mark about Stroud coming out was he had 2 NFL tackles. He had a bunch of NFL caliber wide receivers. What happens when he goes to a place like Houston and guys like Laramie Tunsil miss time and you know, the wide receiving group isn't quite as good as it was. They traded Brandon Cooks away. And when you perturb that system, how would he and Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, how would they, you know, overcome some of these things? And I think some of that is Tank Dell, like Sean here, you know, says, you know, Tank Dell has some juice. You know, Sean Donahoe says his pressure to sack ratio is encouraging given the priors on Stroud. I agree with that as well. And Beat Gamer, for example, says he impressed me a lot in week 1 when he didn't make the rookie mistakes like interceptions and not being too aggressive. Like you know, I'm pretty, you know, when I look at him, I think he's making all the throws and he's doing so in a situation where quarterbacks have had a hard time over the past few years being successful. So yeah, very, very encouraging for Stroud.
I mean, look, when you start thinking about Stroud and you start thinking about, let's go back to something, and we like these guys, right? We've met with them on the S2 side of things, right? Think about how S2 has to approach this, right? Do you want to, we can expound a little bit about S2. If everyone recalls, you know, there were all these texts that were going on before the quarterbacks were drafted, and there, you know, it came out, of course, that CJ was very, very low on this on the side of the S2. That doesn't mean S2 is lacking in efficacy at all. I mean, they're a very good company and they're showing some really interesting things. But you say this to me all the time as a mathematician and as a statistician and a data analytic guru, that there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs, right? There's going to be some that you hit right on the money and others you don't. Maybe, and we're not sure yet, it's only 3 games in. How would you respond to that if you were part of S2 from a testing standpoint? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, so it's hard because, you know, as you know, sitting in that chair, hitting on Matt Ryan, you know, gave you a great deal of cachet and career capital that you from there were able to do, where you were able to make the Julio Jones trade in large part because there was some trust there that you could pick high-end players, right? And so I get worried about, you know, I get worried about the statement I'm going to make because I don't know if it's necessarily going to assuage any decision makers. But the fact is with any data, you have to average out all the data you're getting. And then even then you're trying to make a gamble that the rest of the league is 50-50 on, that maybe you're 55-45 on. But 45 is a huge chunk of missing, right? And so that makes it hard. And when it's a quarterback who is going to be the face of your franchise for at least 2 or 3 years, I think that S2, you know, some teams are using it as an eliminator, if that makes sense. So it's saying if he doesn't score high on this, I don't want him. And where I really think it has to be is it has to be part of the stew. It has to be, okay, we fold in his accuracy, we fold in his size, we fold in his decision making, we fold in you know, what the interview was like, and then we fold in S2, and none of those things can derail you in drafting a guy. But the combination, and so if he can make up for it everywhere else, he might still be a good pick.
I was listening to our good buddy today, Mike Florio, and I have a great deal of respect for him and what Sims do. I mean, I really like listening to those guys. You know, they had a comment. They're still convinced that someone out there tried to turn that around so that CJ Stroud didn't fall or fell later. Hopefully that he would continue to fall and maybe they'd get. I think, you know, as much as I like what they're saying, I don't think that's necessarily the case. But imagine in 10 years or 15 years if you found out that someone was trying to do that. There was a GM out there that was trying to twist it around and see, you know, what would sort of muddy the waters for owners mainly, which is an interesting thing. It's not just the GMs, it's the owners that feel comfortable in taking someone or not. Anyway, we can go on and on about it. I'm just happy to see what he's doing. And I think it's really good for a new head coach and, you know, a second, third year GM, right? And Nick Caserio to make some headway and move in the right direction here. So I think it's fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I think I get worried just because when, you know, for us at Sumer, the big thing is to not try to say 2 things to cover our bases. So there were interviews when, you know, they said that he didn't score poorly. And then there were reports that were pretty credible that said he did score poorly. I think that ultimately, if you're trying to sell data and you're trying to sell information, you have to take the good with the bad. Anybody that expects you to be 100% all the time is not acting in good faith. But there's the other things that you can do to make it look like you're also not acting in good faith. And so you just want to avoid that. I think whatever happens with Stroud, like, look, I think a big deal, and this is maybe one other question for you about your time as a GM. I've learned, because I didn't think Josh Allen would be very good. I didn't think Jordan Love would be very good. There's a number of times where I've missed. I think that the hard part is there becomes a time when obviously you want to root for your predictions, but there also comes a time when you're just like, you got to give up on them and just accept the truth. And because has that ever affected you as a GM where you maybe, let's say, didn't like a guy coming out, but then the information changed and he became available to you? I see it always the other direction where like a former first rounder gets a lot of opportunities, even though he hasn't produced, because all the general managers liked him coming out. Has there ever been a situation where the other way turned, where for whatever reason you didn't like a player, and then later on in his career you ended up having, or opting into using him because information had changed?
Yeah, I mean, you take everything into consideration, of course, and there were times where we were bullish on someone, information came out, and we dropped down 2 or 3 rounds, and then all of a sudden that player was available. And if you're talking about within the draft, it could be even after the draft, right? All of a sudden we were way down and out on a player. 2 or 3 years later, that player comes available to us in free agency, or he does not work out at his first team, and we have the right coach with the right approach, which, by the way, just so everyone knows, it is part of a general manager's job to decide on his coaching staff when you're bringing players in, who will coach the guy the right way, who will respond to a certain type of coaching. That is part of our job as well, working with the head coach to determine the assistant coaches and how you could have someone who is not doing that well can rise to the occasion. We've seen that over the years many, many times. I think that's an impressive thing when a team can pull someone at a good value. No longer do you have to get the guy in the first round. You can get him in free agency for quite an affordable price, and then he starts to thrive in your situation. So yes, that does happen quite often for general managers and team builders, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Sean has a great question. Like, what is the threshold of sample size you wanted as a GM to come off your prior, or basically your initial opinion of a player? Is that a couple of years? Is that a few practices? Like, what does that end up looking like? And obviously you have such a keen sense for talent. Like, is it faster for you, or like, what do you think, like an evaluator, what kind of time do they need to kind of move off of their opinion?
Well, look, what I was trying to say a little bit earlier, certain situations might be, yes, we would love 2 or 3 years down the road and let's come back and revisit this guy. But if you have a scenario where that inside information from the team he went to early on out of the draft, right? And he just got spun around. He didn't like his coach. He didn't like the system, didn't like the city. He had family members in the city and they were disrupting him. I mean, Eric and everyone, there are so many layers to why it would be not 3 years, but maybe a half a year, or the kid gets cut. When you see some of those players that are 4th and 5th rounds, we watch them every year, right? Why did that kid get cut and he was drafted in the 4th or 5th round in year 1? Those are tough ones to explain. Your owner, we dig deep down on that to find out why he was. In fact, did he just not kick it off well with his position coach? What happened? And if we think, wow, our contacts and our information on this player, we think he would fit in our organization, we would go after him. And oftentimes he may be that really solid 3rd or 4th rounder that was cut from somewhere else and then thrived with us.
Yeah, for sure. That's such an interesting story, right? Because it's funny. I think that scouting evaluations of players are so much less rife with some of the frustrating things I see oftentimes in sports, which is that, you see one guy have one great game and everybody's going to rush to call him the GOAT. And then like a guy has a poor game and you're like, oh, I have to reevaluate my entire thought process on him. I think that scouts generally are slower in both directions, which in my opinion is good, because that you're trying to measure inherent talent of a player, whereas oftentimes the production that they have is rife with the circumstances and everything that we don't necessarily know all the answers to, especially on the outside. So that I think that's a good answer. I do want to move because, obviously, it's Monday and we got to get to some of the recaps here. The first one that I want to get to, Thomas, is this absolute stunner that we got in, and I'm going to first show the Sumer Sports Twitter account, just so that everybody knows that they can follow Sumer Sports on Twitter. We're almost to 9,200 followers, which is awesome here. This is the recap of the Cowboys-Cardinals game. The Cowboys were 10.5 to anywhere from early on 10.5-point favorites on the look ahead to 12.5, 13 at times. And what I want people to realize here is how much Arizona really did kind of beat up on the Cowboys. I mean, this is not a fluky game. This is not a situation where, Dallas did get caught, the cornerback, Trayvon Diggs got injured on Thursday. That's obviously detrimental to them. But this wasn't a situation where it's a bunch of Dak Prescott interceptions or a really fluky situation. The Arizona Cardinals, Thomas, for the second straight week have moved the ball really effectively on offense.
Oh my God. I mean, you're looking at Dobbs do what he's doing right now. I honestly, you know how close I am with Dan Quinn. I wanted to call him. He's not going to take my call today, of course. That, after doing what they've done, the riding so high, let's call it the way it is, right? Did they believe the hype? Were they going into playing Arizona thinking, oh, I don't know where we are with this, and how jacked up do you or don't you get up for a team like them? But the reality is, though they still have a long way to go to put their talent together, I mean, they're scheming well. I like what Gannon. I love their approach there. I think it's good for a first-time head coach and a first-time general manager, Monty Austinforth, to come in there and play a team like Dallas, go nut to nut with them, right, head to head with them, and play like they did. And to me, it seemed like you said, you made this comment last night. This wasn't a fluke. I mean, they were rolling along. I mean, I felt like Dallas just kept trying to get up, and they just were always playing catch up, right? They never got in front, correct? So
no, it was from the very get. They were down 9-0 initially, got it closer a few times, got it to 21-16, but then gave up a touchdown really fast. I mean, the funny thing is you look at James Conner, who's the running back for the Cardinals. I think many thought was an afterthought, older running back, kind of an okay player. There were holes everywhere for him. And he was running the football with incredible, vigilance for 2 straight weeks now. And you're talking about this Cardinals team, and I wrote about this at Sumer Sports. I think it's a good time to talk about this. I wrote about on SumerSports.com last week about how the Cardinals should consider drafting quarterbacks. One quarterback, kind of with the Caleb Williams pick, assuming that they get the first overall pick, which is not necessarily the soundest assumption anymore. And maybe a pick that they get for Kyler Murray, should they do that. And so I was looking around the league and thinking, when you have like all those Thomas, is that your car? Okay. I think we got you. Okay. But like when you think about all of the quarterbacks that are injured now, Thomas, that are young. Anthony Richardson sat out yesterday. Obviously, Bryce Young sat out yesterday. Wouldn't you rather, if you're a team builder, be able to showcase a quarterback with first-round pedigree in NFL games to all these teams that are desperate for one? I think the Jets, for example, like we talked about the Jets last week with Zach Wilson, who's kind of struggling. Wouldn't you want to show the Jets a second quarterback and be like, hey, this guy's still on a rookie deal. Come and get him if you want him. To me, that feels like such a way to sort of like have at least a little bit of control over the league while you're rebuilding.
Yeah, I think you have a valid point there. I think, am I echoing, by the way?
Not really. Not really. It sounds fine.
I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry about that. Obviously, being in a parking lot, it's not the best. You made comments about that. You cut out there for a second. Did you talk about the idea of literally drafting how many quarterbacks within, they're in a really unique situation potentially, although this game might change your opinion a little bit from that article. Maybe they're not going to be in the top 5. I don't know.
Yeah, there are two teams in the NFC North that are 0-3. They, in theory, have to beat each other. Arizona, the Rams are more competitive than we thought they'd be. They play tonight against the Bengals. And Seattle's come back after a bad first game loss. They've looked okay in the last 2 games, winning both of them. So I think that the path is still there for the Cardinals to get the number 1 pick. But if they do get it, so let's say they get the first pick, and let's say Houston improves and they get the 5th pick, let's say, right? And Houston's pick goes to them because of Will Anderson. We talked about that at nauseum. And you're able to trade Kyler Murray. It's a little tricky. It's about $46 million in dead money for the Cardinals to trade Murray, but at the same time, it's more expensive to keep him. So they trade him. Let's say they get pick 25, right? So now you're sitting here at 1, you're sitting here at 5, you're sitting here at 25. In theory, if you're building this team, you could trade out of 5 and get to like 10 for a team that wants, let's say, the 3rd quarterback in the draft, or maybe Drake May falls that far or whatever. Now you have pick number 1. It's going to be a premier quarterback. You have your 2nd pick, which is going to be left tackle, defensive end, wide receiver, corner, some premier position. And then you get the back half of the first round and you take that last quarterback that's going to go in round 1. And again, like I said on the, I think last show, like part of me is like, okay, quarterbacks who are younger are spending more of their thought processes trying to learn the game and the speed that they can't protect themselves. And to me, that means that you're going to get guys that are going to get hurt and they're going to sit out games. Wouldn't you rather those 5 games a year be started by a guy that you're auditioning to the other teams, or a guy that's going to take over for your first pick in case he doesn't work, which we know Zach Wilson didn't work. Justin Fields didn't really work. Trey Lance didn't really work. And like, I just think you give yourself so much of an advantage doing that. And I understand only one guy plays, but one guy doesn't always play because of the injury risk.
I think you have a very valid point here. I'm worried that with you doing things like this, you're going to have Monty Ossenforth looking for an assistant GM, and before you know it, you're going to be losing you from Sumer. These are really, really good thoughts. And the way that you fold in the data, we were talking about it today, man. I could have talked all day earlier about it, and reading your information on it, of course, is multi-layered, which a lot of times in NFL teams, we've said this just so everyone knows this. We don't just as a GM have 10 or 12 people focused on acquisitions and putting together a roster like we talk about all the time at Sumer, right, Eric? Most of our guys are focused on getting the game ready for the coaches. We did that all the time. Now, when it came around to free agency in the draft, we would have some of our guys focusing and helping us a little bit. This time of year, no, that's not where their focus is. So my point on that is the more data people can provide their general managers and management with really good ideas like this, with backing that they can go and talk to their owners about. I'm talking about data analytical backing, I think is a really, really big thing in the future of what we're doing in the league. And I think Sumer can help with that as well, obviously.
Oh, I certainly think so. And I agree with you. I think there's so much blocking and tackling that needs to be done. And it's all like incredibly important work that, I mean, look, like Belichick had Ernie Adams thinking about these things all the time. And like, there's an element to that. And you wonder why, like, oh, how did Belichick think to run motion on field goal block? It's like, well, I'm assuming Bill thinks about everything all the time. And so, and like you and I are kind of similar in that way, where we're kind of in this position now where we can take a step back and look at how the league is happening and kind of think about the edge cases there. This is a really good point. Sean Donahue asks, is there data out there about high draft picks retaining value? The only hole in the theory is not being able to trade for QB might have bad tape. My comeback to this, because it's rare, right? My comeback to this is the Cardinals drafted Josh Rosen 10th in 2018. Josh Rosen had a really bad statistical year as a rookie. The Cardinals drafted Kyler Murray. So everybody knew they were out on Josh Rosen. And the Dolphins still gave the Cardinals a 2nd-round pick for him. So imagine a situation where you drafted them both at the same time, and you never had to signal that you were out on a player until you actually traded him. I think that the value would be higher. The fact that what we're talking about earlier, Thomas, and back me up if I'm right here, but like just because a guy you think highly of fails somewhere else a lot of people are like, well, a lot of people say, well, those are different circumstances. In my team, we're going to nurture that player and help get the best out of him. I think that actually leads to a higher value than maybe would be assumed even after a failure in the first stop for a player.
I agree with you. 100% agree with you. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, so and so that's just a cool thing to think about. And obviously, sumersports.com/subscribe if you want to get our newsletter. You want to just get up to date on all the stuff we're thinking about here. And I can assure you, we're thinking about things, I think, in ways that no one else is. I do want to talk about your old team, the Atlanta Falcons. They went to Detroit this week. Now the Falcons were 2-0, coming off of a one-score win against the Packers at home. The Lions were kind of reeling a little bit. They had lost an overtime game to the Seahawks last week, and not the most impressive performance offensively for Detroit, as just 34th percentile in EPA per play. Goff threw an interception to Jesse Bates and all these things, but the defensive performance for the Lions, I think, he needs to be talked about. After a week where they had a lot of guys hurt, after a week where they surrendered 36 points to a Seattle team that had been stymied by the Rams, this is the second really good defensive performance for the Detroit Lions in 2 games, holding Kansas City to 20 on opening night and then holding the Falcons without a touchdown in this one. This, as much as I've been wanting to see this line, I like Dan Campbell, I like Jared Goff, this is the most professional win I think Detroit's had in quite some time, to the point where I wasn't really sweating out whether or not they win the game in the fourth quarter, which is usually new for a Detroit team.
Let me start by saying I like Dan Campbell. The more I watch him, the more I realize, like, this dude is a competitor. You see him going out there, his nose is all red. I mean, he's got this look in his eyes about, like, he is so damn focused on it. And I really like Arthur Smith. I've said this time and again. Arthur Smith, really smart, tough ass himself. 2 tough guys going in there, bringing their teams in there with grit. Because going into this game, I thought, Atlanta had a defense that was playing well with their new defensive coordinator, with what Arthur Smith is doing with that team. And then to your point, let me just start by saying, even though Goff's numbers weren't as good as we would expect them to be, I still am impressed with what he's doing, because I look back, as we all do sometimes, right? Wow, when he first came over from the Rams and that first year, how he was dealing with things. There's something about him striking. He didn't look the most athletic when he scored his touchdown, right? But he did. He was competing. That team is competing. And then in the end, I was thinking about this. Wow, this defense came to play, man. They were throwing it around. They were coming up. You want to talk about people nut to nut on Bijan Robinson? I mean, literally knocking helmets off. I mean, that was impressive, because that is a really tough run game at Atlanta, and they stymied them, and they had a presence. And, offensively, I don't want to get too into the offense on the Atlanta side, but for the fact that teams are going in there saying, okay, let's try to control this really good run game with Algiers, of course, an offensive line that is usually playing their butts off, right? Yesterday was a little different. But if we can control these 2 cats, and then we can force Desmond Ridder to do his thing, get him antsy, like any time, right? I mean, he's still a very, very young quarterback. You get Dan Quinn out there and a lot of these, Jeff Ulbrich and a lot of these guys, these D coordinators that are really edgy, they're gonna put a lot of pressure on Desmond Ridder down the stretch. So they're gonna have to figure out how to get that ball around, continue to get it over to Pitts, get it over to Drake London, get the ball out on the swing to our guy Bijan, and then see where it goes from there. But if they start stopping that run game and you put it all on Desmond, that's going to be a tough thing in year 1 as the first year as a starter.
Yeah, for sure. And as the chart suggested, look, they were in the bottom, percentiles in terms of early down run success. And I got to say, this was a team in Detroit. If they don't get railroaded by the Carolina Panthers in the run game in week 16 last year, they're in the playoffs, right? So you think about, regimes, Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, they go out and get Jack Campbell. They go out and get Brian Branch, who I know we were kind of like, he's a little limited. But it's just like kind of your old boss, Bill Belichick, taking limited but useful players and making them more useful than their sort of their math would suggest. To me, is a very, very good omen there for the Lions. But yeah, you're right. Desmond Ritter's not going to have success if this team can't run on early downs. And so good on the Detroit Lions for doing that. I do want to look at a couple more games. This one I want to look at because this game actually lived up to the billing. The Los Angeles Chargers 28-24 over the Minnesota Vikings in Minneapolis. The Vikings were kind of average offensively after you put in the turnovers. Pretty good as far as success rate and yards per play. But, Justin Herbert was 40 of 47, Thomas, and, threw for over 400 yards, was really, really good, even though, we saw last week, Thomas, when we looked at this chart when it was Vikings-Eagles, the Eagles had a 99th percentile run game in that game. The Vikings had a first percentile run defense. The Chargers had a first percentile run offense in this game, meaning the Vikings shut them down, and Justin Herbert responded with one of his best games as a pro, adding 21 expected points. When you thought about this game, Thomas, what did you think about?
Oh, look, two teams going in there with a really tough situation, right? Wanting to come out and not be winless, of course. Watching the Vikings, I'm a little concerned. I mean, I want your opinion on this because you're a Viking person. Where are they with quarterback and head coach? Do you think they're hitting in stride? They have some JJ, watching him run routes, by the way, I'm just thinking, man, this team has the ability to play. Of course, I've said this all along, though. Where are they with the quarterback and the head coach? Are they in line? Do they feel like they're rolling? Because I flip it over to the Chargers, and I really love what they're doing there. I love their quarterback, of course. Herbert, to me, can play with them all, and he can continue to get better and better. But I just keep coming back to this game, looking at Minnesota, and I'm thinking, I'm just not feeling the groove. What was it early in the game, right? Another turnover. Hawk gets the ball, and I think was right upon contact, right? I'm just thinking, not a great way to get the ball rolling here. In the end, though, look, let's go back and forth here. They get down the field. There's some stuff going on where the crowd noise in Minnesota stifled them. 26 seconds off the clock. Wasn't that right?
It's a
big deal.
Let's talk strategy for a little bit here. So the Chargers stopped the Vikings on a 4th down and goal, the penultimate drive. So they're up 28-24. If you bet the under in that game, right, an all-time great lucking out of under 54 points. The Vikings get down inside the 5, a couple run plays, a couple pass plays. It doesn't work. The Chargers get out to about the 25 or so yard line. They have 4th and 1. All the mathematical models say, look, you have an 80% chance of making it if you punt, or of winning the game if you punt. You have an 89% chance of winning the game if you get the 1 yard and kneel the ball out and forever and ever, amen. Brandon Staley, who usually has reneged on the math over the past few years in terms of going for it, goes for it. They run a full. So this is my issue. They go for it. They run a fullback dive in a game where I just showed everybody, right?
Yep.
They were the worst rushing team in our data set in that game. Okay.
Yep.
Right. So you run the football. My issue with this is I'm okay with going for it. I think actually going for it's fine because I think Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson, your secondary, I don't like that gamble. If the Vikings get the ball at the 40 with a chance to beat you, I don't like having to guard Justin Jefferson. So I'm cool with if we can get 1 yard, game over. My issue, Thomas, and hopefully you'll just say just punt it anyway. But if you have a quarterback who is 40 of 47 for over 400 yards, a wide receiver who had 12 catches in that game for 150 yards or so, drop back 5 steps and throw the football, right? There's no reason to run the football in that play, which might mean just don't go for it in general because it's a run down in 4th and 1. but I just don't like the play call. I'm fine with going for it.
So do you think, evidently what people are saying is, well, why didn't they just get the dudes pushing Herbert forward, right? The response was from Staley was all the gaps were filled. Look, we had that many times in Atlanta. It drove me bonkers, right? I'm thinking, why in the hell can we not get a first down? It's a half a yard. And we had a string of that for years. To me, it is a big, big deal, right? As an organization for the head coach to go for it or not to go for it, right? The tone you're sending, the belief you have in your team that you can't get less than a half of a yard or right around a half a yard is a really, in my mind, a confidence killer or a confidence booster. I mean, look, when I initially saw it, I thought, get rid of that ball, get him down the other end, and let's roll. How many minutes was it? Was it a minute and what? 48? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was around 2 minutes or so.
Okay, it was 2. Yeah. I'm struggling. I'm struggling because when that happened, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be another dig on, Brandon, and he's a really good D coordinator, right? But he takes a lot of heat in the decisions. Help me with this. What was the stat? Go for it and win the game 80 something?
So it was 80% if they would have punted. It was 89% if they would have go for it. And the reason is, so if you kick it back to the Vikings, your chance of winning, I believe, was 55%. Or sorry, I take that back. If you don't make it, it's about 50-50 whether or not you're going to win. And we saw the other side of it, right? If you make it, it's 100%. And so it's basically just saying that you have about an 80 to 90% chance of converting that 4th and 1 is kind of how that goes. And so it does tip in their favor. Again, I just think the issue is, and now I want to get to a little bit forward here, is like, I also think, though, there's an element of it where, and I talk about this in the Going for 2 Down 7 article at SumerSports.com. I think the other secondary part is if you give the Vikings 60 yards to go for it, they're going to be up, right? They're going to be moving. They're going to know they're in a hurry up. They're going to know they got to score quickly, and that puts pressure on the defense. In a weird way, and tell me if I'm full of crap here, I think when you gave the Vikings a short field, they kind of relaxed a little. Oh, this is our, we got this. The Chargers defense isn't very good, and we have a good offense. All that stuff's true. And it's funny, and we saw this at the end, to your point, I think the answer to the question is no. I don't know if the quarterback and head coach are as in sync as we want, because Kirk in the press conference blamed Kevin O'Connell for not wanting to spike the ball in that last second thing, which made him hurry up, made him uncomfortable through the interception and everything. I think that in a weird way, going for the 4th down, even if you don't make it, made the Vikings relax a little bit too much and didn't end up being great for them offensively because they were kind of out of sorts. You could tell that they were not in rhythm on that last drive.
They weren't in rhythm. I'm not going to say you're full of crap, but my head wouldn't have gone there where they relaxed. I just can't imagine. I felt like, everything in the building, as there can get loud and noisy, and there just was, again, I just felt like the communication was mixing, and I didn't think they relaxed necessarily, but maybe you have something there. You should do a little bit of an analysis on that situation and see if you can glean any information that way, because that is an interesting thought.
Yeah, I always think, for example, Thomas, like when you're up 3, let's say, and it's 4th and 1, and there's like 2 minutes left. I don't like kicking a field goal to go up 6, because I think that sometimes the opposing offense knows, and the way offenses are, especially if you're against a great quarterback, being up 6 is a weird place to be in, because the other team knows they have to score a touchdown. And so they push all the advantages of 2-minute offense on you. Whereas when you're only up 3, they generally will lay up for a field goal, and sometimes they can miss, and there are like motivational aspects of it. Before we get going, one more game, and we were talking about this one, your former rival, but also, your pals with Mickey Loomis, the Saints, they go on the road in Green Bay. They put up 17 unanswered in the first few quarters. And then the Packers, with Jordan Love, who had looked, shaky, albeit, without Jair Alexander, without Christian Watson, without Aaron Jones, without David Bakhtiari. They were looking shaky for the first few quarters. Derek Carr gets hurt when it's 17-0. Jameis Winston goes in, doesn't really do much. Packers come back. They do the whole going for 2 when you're down 8 thing. They get it to 6. They get the ball back. They go score a touchdown. They kick the PAT. They end up having a lead. One last drive by the Saints got them into field goal range, but the young kicker missed a field goal in Lambeau Field. This game, I think we're going to look back on this one, Thomas, and we're going to say this was a huge game in the NFL season. When it comes down to NFC standings, when it comes down to what the Saints were holding on to with that 17-point lead, what the Packers overcame. A week after, Thomas, they blew a 12-point lead to the Falcons. They now catch up on a game here. They go to Detroit on Thursday. They go to Detroit on Thursday. No, they go to Green Bay to face Detroit Thursday. This game's huge. What were your takeaways of this game?
Look, my takeaway was, by the way, you said it earlier, and if you watched any of the video out there and the media takes from your buddy Jordan Love, he took a shot at you indirectly, not Eric Eager, but the group out there that was questioning him. Did you see that? Like, who are they to question me? And I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of people to question. They don't have much to go on here, Jordan. And quite honestly, the first half of that, or 3/4 of the game, I'm thinking, this is rather pedestrian. I know they don't have certain players, etc., but I want to see him really, really, rocking it. To his credit, down the stretch, he kicked it into gear and did what he needed to do. So I was impressed with that. I still want to see more from him. I mean, he hasn't answered the questions yet. Let's see where he is with it all, right? I mean, look, I think the Saints, obviously, that was a 42-yard miss, right? Was it 42?
Yeah, it wasn't a tip shot, but it wasn't a gimme either.
Yeah. So, but my feeling was, by all rights, Green Bay might have lost 2 games in a row. And, is that on Jordan Love? So he just has to continue to grow and learn, and he needs to have that confidence about him. I like that he's responding to the Eric Eagers of the world the way he did. And maybe the Dimitroff, because we talked about it. Does he have the leadership ability to really take it home? They've been working a lot on that. I've been reading about it and hearing about Matt LaFleur and how they have been working on trying to, cultivate his leadership ability. When the crap hits the fan, will he be there? There were questions when he came out of school whether he was that. Now he's had a few years to work on it, and I'm hoping that they've developed him into something more than he was 3 or 4 years ago.
But to your point, against Atlanta last Sunday, with the ball, with a chance to win, he looked pretty hopeless. This week, he looked the opposite of hopeless. There were some real good throws in there. There was some real good support from his group. And honestly, and I know he was in your building and you have a lot of respect for him, Matt LaFleur is a great coach. Like, he's one of the, if you were to start a franchise, top 8 guys you'd start with? You'd have him on the list, right? He's fantastic. To me, this year is all about how good he is, and I think he's pretty damn good, LaFleur. So
yeah, I think he's really coming into his own. And this is a big year for him, as you know, rolling without Aaron Rodgers and seeing how he's going to deal with it. You're throwing in superlatives out there, and this is no offense to him. I'm not throwing greats out there to any of the really young guys yet, because I want to see more. I think he has very good coaching talent. I think he's got a nice mind about him. Of course, he himself is growing as a leader, right? In those earlier years, he's feeling his way around dealing with Aaron Rodgers. That's not easy. My God, that's not easy. Yep. I mean, the confidence that you're going in there with and delivering it to a team, just like Mike McDaniels is slowly starting to come in, right? As he delivers. You watch, not to get off on another topic, but watch Mike McDaniels deliver his message of why, after the game, why they didn't go for more. And he was kind of nervous to talk about it. And I'm wondering if that's part of his sly like a fox guy. But he doesn't want Sean Payton, one of the dudes in coaching, after his ass for the rest of the season, right? He did what he did. By the way, we haven't talked about that. I guarantee there are a lot of people out there who are loving seeing Sean, as you talk about a very, very good coach. But what he said about why am I blanking?
Nathaniel Hackett.
Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, that's everyone's saying, okay, now let's see how you feel being embarrassed. They asked him online, how do you feel again about this embarrassment? He said it was an embarrassment, right? I'm talking about Sean Payton. I don't know if you heard him. Then a reporter asked, yeah, okay, well, that's embarrassing, but it's historical. He was basically saying it's embarrassing. Tell us about how embarrassing, because it's historical. He basically said, next question. He was out of there, right? So there was a lot of passion there.
You got to wonder, gave up 70 to the Miami Dolphins. You gave up 35 to a Commanders team that needed a field goal at the end of the game to not get shut out by the Bills. It's dark days. I mean, that Ejiro Evero, the coordinator that was in Denver last year, that was pretty good. Now he's in Carolina. You sort of wonder how valuable he ended up being and whether he's going to get a look at head coach, given what's happened in Denver after he's left. This is a lot of fun. I know we can't get to every game. Obviously, this is just a great time. I'm really, I'm really excited about what we're able to do on Mondays with this show. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. I can't wait to continue to grow this show. Thomas, any parting words?
No, just great job navigating this. And again, I can't wait to hear people's responses on what they're looking for, because the Monday, as you mentioned, is going to be quite different moving forward on the Wednesdays, right? I don't know if you want to comment on that. Wednesdays are going to be much more bigger picture.
More topics. Yep.
Right, very good.
Awesome.
Look forward to it.
Well, for sure. Well, for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 106 of the Sumer Sports Show.